Hello? Yes, very good. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I want to start as my friend from Mexico by expressing gratitude to UNESCO for the invitation and to the city here that has been so kind in offering us a space to reflect, to think, to live for a while in this beautiful town. And I have the advantage and the pleasure to know some of the locals through a friend here in the audience, and really it's a very remarkable city and remarkable people, and it's here in Hangzhou. And as Charles was saying, I have lived many lives in my short life so far, and one of the things is, one of the dimensions of that life is combining my profession, which is economics, with different other areas of knowledge. And that's how I became more involved in human rights and culture issues. And because I realized that an economic science, just focus on economic problems, is a very poor science. Okay? It has to be addressing other issues. And that may allow me to understand better issues of development, which are very complex in nature. So in this regard, there are some reflections. One of the problems when one tries to address an issue like development from a point of view of, let's say, culture or human rights, is that development is a concept that was developed by economists. So it was always referred by economists and economic concepts. So people coming from other areas don't see themselves as anything. Okay? But it's very obvious. Economists were not thinking about culture or human rights when they were thinking about development. They were thinking about economic problems, which are basically the problem of poverty and the poverty alleviation. And so everything is around the idea of poverty alleviation through income, which is the major indicator for us economists of progress. And we measure income per capita, and we say that society is better than others because income per capita has increased. And so China lives better today than 20 years ago, from an economist's point of view, basically because the income per capita has increased in the last few years. So when one measures just through income per capita progress and human development, one really ends up thinking that that's a very poor measure. And I belong to a generation of economists who started to study and try to understand economics in the last 25 years. And in the last 25 years, something happened. All of a sudden, we have some new concepts, human development. Although human development is quite well known today as a concept, 25 years ago, it didn't exist. The first human development report was published in the early 90s, 1990 or 1989, I don't remember exactly. I was doing my master's degree in 1991 in the UK, and we read for the first time the Human Development Report in an economics course, because it was so new, so unusual. And we heard to Amartya Sen for the first time, an economist, talking about different dimensions of poverty, not just income poverty, but other dimensions of poverty. So, let me start by making these reflections, because one of the problems is that then you demand from culture to get into that framework, and it's very difficult. I think the question for culture to get into a debate on development is trying to create some conceptual links between what culture or people thinking about culture have and what development has become. And development, fortunately for those thinking from a cultural perspective, is more an integrated approach today than it used to be 25 years ago. It's not anymore just an economics concept. And that is thanks to an economist, I want to say, actually, who convinced many people in the profession, economists, that economics was not enough to define life. But still, the concept still has a very strict economic dimension in many ways. And so I would like to propose that we should try to make three conceptual differences. One is culture, the other is cultural industries and markets, and the other is artistic expressions. I would call culture something that is really, let's say, the more abstract level. Okay? It refers to collective identity, and it may be reflected in different dimensions. And I'm going to use different dimensions because for us economists, we need to create categories so that we can create indicators. That's how we measure. Okay? We create the concept and then we create indicators. So which are the categories here? Language, for example, is a dimension of culture. Collective historical memory is a dimension of culture. Tradition and practices, okay? Celebrations, music, dance, specific way of painting or sculpture, spiritual beliefs, values, clothing and costumes, okay? Gastronomy was mentioned before, and different forms of tangible and intangible heritage. So these are elements of culture. But when one has to address the question of how culture affects social inclusion and cohesion, I think we need to get into more detailed analysis. And then that's why I need the concept of cultural industries. Cultural industries is something that exists in the modern times because it becomes available because of the existence of markets. When there were no markets in the world, there were no cultural industries. So it has been created in the last 200 years. One of the tragedies of cultural history, if you want, artistic history, is the fact that one of the major creators, Mozart, was living in a world without markets. And the difference between the life of Beethoven and Mozart is basically Beethoven had the capacity to have markets and property rights over his intellectual creation. But Mozart couldn't. He lived in a pre-modern time. So what happened is that we have been developing these industries and markets in the last 200 years. So we have music industry, we have film industry, we have clothing industry, we have artisan production, we have furniture industry, we have painting and sculpture markets. Collectors live out of the existence of those markets. Antiquity markets, cultural tourism industry, which is a specific dimension of those industries. And even something that was mentioned about the Guggenheim in Bilbao, rural and urban regeneration of architectural heritage. And these are things that create something that is very important for development, employment. So all these activities create employment, and employment relates to income. And that's where economists see it as a value. Okay? We, as economists, may not understand the concept of culture, but we understand the concept of cultural industries and markets. But as Amartya Sen reminds us economists, markets is not enough. And it happens also with culture. Although we can have cultural industries and markets, there's a dimension of culture that is not marketable. I call that artistic expression. For example, if I write a poem for my own pleasure, not for publishing it and selling it to others, just for my own pleasure. If I paint something because I want to paint that landscape or figure or whatever, just for my own pleasure, not to sell it. What is that? That's an artistic expression. Okay? And it can be individual, but it can be collective. Everything that Carlos was mentioning about the experiences in Medellin, for example, is about collective activities, artistic expressions, theater groups, dance groups, that they exist not for the purpose of selling any good or service, just for the expression of the people who belong to them. And that artistic expression has also an impact on social cohesion and on social inclusion, not just employment. Even art as itself can create elements for social inclusion. So that's the non-economic dimension of culture, contributing to social inclusion and social cohesion. Once we make those differences between cultural markets and industries and artistic expression, the relationship with social cohesion and with social inclusion are different. You said something, Charles, at the beginning, that who's afraid of Virginia Woolf is afraid of culture. Well, some of us are afraid of culture. Okay? Some of us, I mean, those who are in government. Why? One of our fears with culture and the influence and the emphasis on culture is that many of our countries will live in multicultural societies. And as described in the case of Beijing, there can be cultural clashes. And we don't want, the least thing a government wants is conflict. We rule for, peace. That's part of it. Governance is about resolution of conflicts. No conflicts made possible. Okay? So what we're trying to do all the time is using those elements in order to create, let's say, a peaceful environment. But sometimes if we put too much emphasis on cultural identity, particularly collective cultural identity, we may create clashes. And we are aware of that risk. So I was mentioned today in the breakfast meeting that we're always trying to see culture as an opportunity, but also as a risk. And in taking political decisions and policy decisions, we have to be very clear and not naive about it. Because sometimes, many times, culture has been used as a way of creating clashes, problems, conflicts. Okay? Which is, by the way, exactly the country that we would like with culture. Culture should be a way of expressing life, not eliminating life. Okay? But it exists, and we see why culture itself may create problems for social cohesion. Because one thing, language diversity can be perceived as a barrier for communication. Okay? It happens all the time in the Basque country, right? Language diversity sometimes is perceived as a barrier. You cannot get it here because you don't speak Spanish or Basque. So there are barriers there. Then you have also spiritual beliefs or collective historical memories sometimes are read as exclusion of others. Okay? If you are from this religion, that means you reject that other. Okay? And other element, clothing, can be used as justification for discrimination. Yeah, sure. So what we're trying to say here is that sometimes culture creates risks, and we have to be aware of them. And I think it's important that we try to see how cultural expressions can become positive, not discriminatory, creating social environments that enable development. Was there. Thank you. I want to close my presentation by saying something that I think culture in general can only be a positive factor for social cohesion and inclusion when it is perceived as part of an intercultural dialogue. If it is perceived as something that shares with other cultures and ideas in a peaceful manner. But on the other hand, if we enhance cultural markets, cultural industries, and artistic expressions, we can create effective tools for social inclusion. So I think culture may be itself a risk, but some dimensions of culture, the markets, the industry, the expression, may be very good elements for social cohesion.